Thank you. So my name's Noah Smith. I'm with MEDTECH Engineering, is our former name, down in Miamisburg, Ohio. We are an international automation company, and so where that kind of leads itself to is I've been in the automation industry now about 20 years. I've been in the med device automation world for about the last 5, and we find some really common overlaps between all of our different customers. So we predominantly work with some of the larger guys. We work with 7 of the top 10 global med device companies, big names that everybody would recognize. But then we also work with a lot of individualized concepting companies that are just getting to the point that potentially many of you would be, and trying to figure out, okay, I can't make this by hand anymore. How do I get into automation, and what is automation even? So that's where my experience kind of comes into the fold. So our primary focus areas are surgical devices, cardiovascular devices, drug delivery, and wearables kind of devices, and then also the biomems, which is incorporating electronic functions into biologic elements and areas. So a couple key points we'll try and cover today, or I'll try and cover just to add some content, is what is automation? Everybody has some presumptions of what automation is, and most of those have some background on where they came up with those preconceptions. At the same point is, what is the right level of automation for your current device, for your future plans for your device, and how do you figure out where that is? In addition, we'll go through the cons of all manual processes and the benefits of starting to weave in automation, and then how do you actually figure out who the right partner is for automation? The term integrator gets thrown around a lot, or an integrator really is taking commercial components and adding them together to give you a functional machine or process or automated machine. So, and even though he mentioned hold questions to the end, and that, I'm a pretty laid back guy. Feel free to raise a hand and interrupt. It won't throw me too far off. So the first kind of element of that, and hopefully some interaction, is when you think of automation, what are the goals of automation? Why do people even look at automation? Does anybody have any kind of precursor thoughts on why you would look at automation? Speed. That's one of the classic ones. Any other thoughts? What was that? Sorry?
Error reduction.
Exactly. Error reduction, improvement of quality of device, lots of many different areas. And these are kind of some of the common, responses we'll get from customers. Requires less labor and production cost, potentially. Performs tasks faster, speed. Will improve my quality and consistency. And then it's going to provide me a more accurate and repeatable process, production, device, many things. So the biggest concerns with that are none of those are incorrect, but those aren't the only reasons why you automate things. There's many other functions. So to jump from straight manual production where you've got an operator standing there and assembling things and going into a full automation production line is a much bigger leap than people give it credit for. It is not quite that simple. So the real goal of automation is to improve your current manual process. It's that simple. So here's some examples of different levels of automation. All right? You've got your manual station where all it is a fixture or a piece of tooling, and it's helping the operator or helping you in production hold those different pieces of a medical device in reference or in position. And that's all it's doing. It's making sure that everything is repeatably held in the same way, in the same location. And then that goes all the way up to full production lines. But the point is that there's different levels in between there, and it's not all or nothing. So when is a manual system the best fit? At times, as an automation person, as an automation, somebody that's been in the industry for a long time, automation doesn't solve everything. There are perfectly good times where you should stay with a manual process and keep an operator in front of it doing the process all day long. So here's some of the reasons why you would want to do that. A manual process that we can add a couple sensors and a couple, automation smarts to is going to improve the process without adding additional complexity and cost. And how do you support that automation? Because one of the things that people don't consider is you've got this medical device, you've been able to prove that it solves a little bit of need, you're starting to make maybe a couple copies of it, but how do you then multiply that to start getting to decent levels of production volume? One of the simpler ways is to take your existing process and just add a little bit of smarts to it. A sensor, an inspection, something that makes it simpler. It also is very beneficial when your current budget and the current investment that you've got in your product doesn't lend itself to spending more money and getting into production. At a startup phase, most of the time you're working on your business plan, you're working on your actual product model, you're working on how do I even commercialize this? If you go to your investors or your own pocket and start looking to spend money on automation, that might not be the best ROI for your next phase of your business. So the next level of automation we call semi-automation. So this is where you're starting to do automatic positions and motions and other things to not only hold the product in the right position in a fixture, but then to start to do things to automatically put it together or automatically glue it or weld it or to add automated process functions. That's really the next step. So now you've held your product in precise location, but now you're starting to automate some of those processes that may be giving you difficulty. This is also one of the places that's the largest ROI, because operators have good days and bad days. They have days where their allergies are killing them, and so they're trying to look at something under a magnifying glass to assemble it or inspect it. That might not be a good day for them. Could be many external issues. And I think that's another kind of misnomer of automation is the goal of automation is not to eliminate operators. The goal of automation is to let operators do the things that automation can't and let the machinery do the things that an operator necessarily isn't the most efficient doing. And that's another big misnomer in the industry. We work 200 to 300 projects a year of all different levels and sizes. Almost zero of our projects are actually eliminating or displacing operators. It has nothing to do with eliminating jobs. It's all about repurposing them, repositioning them into places that you can really use the human skill factor. And that's really the function now, especially in a tight job economy like we're currently in. Nobody can find people to fill all their vacancies. It's virtually impossible, ourselves included. So identify the places where an operator isn't the best use of those resources. And that's really what automation helps you do. So semi-automation is adding in more of that integrated automation to those manual processes that I mentioned earlier. It's adding automated functions and motions and positions and higher level vision inspection and things like that. And if at any time I say something that's automation vernacular and you go, what's he talking about? Raise a hand. It's one of those things that every industry you just kind of get used to the language. But even in a semi-automated function, that doesn't mean that it's a push a button, walk away, and the machine runs for 8 hours. It's an operator's doing other functions like loading bulk feeding mechanisms or feeding a conveyor or finding ways to still work with the machinery, but they're not manually putting one piece on each time to process and getting one piece off each time as a finished product. That's really all of the next step of semi-automation is. So fully automated system. So a fully automated system is, again, it's that next level. It's now you've got automated inspections, you've got automated assembly and welding and gluing functions, and it's also automated bulk handling of parts, which we call singulation. So if you take a box of parts of one element, you dump it into a hopper, and you do that with 3, 4, 5 part hoppers, and out comes in the end a finished product that's been QC checked or verified, and you can even do traceability and validation of those features. So that's another element that we get into a lot in medical devices. The machinery is part of your validation process. It's giving you those report and those data points and that information to make your validation process smoother. So we actually offer some level of validation services with our machinery as a value-added service. It's not offered by everybody, but that's one of the advantages is we only work in medical device. We don't work in automotive, consumer packaging, all over the place, because medical device and medical is too specialized. It's too specific, the parts are too small, the processes are too delicate. That doesn't work when you're running a medical device production next to a welding cell for making truck chassis. It just isn't the same. And it's not the same technologies and techniques. So total automation is that next stage, the automatic feeding and the assembly. It has some elements to consider, which is where is the actual production going to be long term? When you get to this phase, you're talking about a more complex piece of machinery, potentially 7-digit type of machine costs. So if this machine is going to stay in the U.S., there's usually a lot higher level of automation on it because operators cost more in the U.S. But if you're going to a low-cost country, the consideration is that if you put a high level of automation in a low-cost country, not all of those production facilities have the maintenance and the capability to support a high level of automation. So that's really where, Invotech or an integration partner really can kind of work with you, is to those considerations that we think of that you might not. If I take a fully automated lights out machine and I stick it in a plant that has no maintenance, you're going to spend most of your time on the phone with my service team. That's not good for you in a production environment or ourselves in trying to support and keep production running. So that's that total automation level. So some of the cons of a manual process. So this is just kind of a case example. I do have on the end of this as a QR code just so you can zap and go straight to our website of other case examples. Because in this instance, it's a cardiovascular device. We'll call it a catheter. And what this customer was doing they were doing a lot of manual testing of flexing the device and then taking inspection images and seeing how that flex compared to what it should have been. So a lot of manual comparison testing. The other part of that was they would come in and they would take electrical probes and touch the tip of the device to prove that it made a circuit or that it passed its electrical functions, which is all perfectly fine. But that whole process was 15 different operators or steps where they needed to walk the product, and it took 20 minutes to complete one device. That's the kind of things that drive component cost. 20 different people or 20 minutes and potentially 15 different people touching it is all just costs going into product. So the solution wasn't to eliminate all 15 people and then just put a lights out machine. The solution was the complex things that you're having individuals make judgment calls. I think that's kind of bent the right amount, or, it looks like it's about in reference to the angles and things like that. You stick a vision camera over top of it and it can tell you binary function, yes or no, it passes or it fails all day long because it doesn't make those interpretations. It says yes or no, it's a good part. Now, that's something to keep in mind because if you have a product that isn't easily making yes or no decisions on its efficacy to being a good part, that adds another level of complexity. So in this example, we were able to give them basically a two-station automation process that accomplished all of those different chart flexes and all of those reference points and also do electrical testing to them. And it cut the process from 20 minutes down to 70 seconds. So your ROI and your what we often call OEE, or operational efficiency, skyrockets. And that's really the numbers and the things that get into the production and the business minds when you're looking at what are my production goals, how do I get cost out of items and things like that. It's not always just how could I source it to the lowest cost supplier. It's how do I reduce every level of cost I'm adding to my product. And then maximizing that every product I make has a high chance of being a good product. All of that takes into a point what your true cost of production is. So, just kind of an example. So I mentioned it, operational equipment effectiveness, efficiency, it's kind of a universal. What that's really doing is it's comparing your cycle rate, your scrap volume, your other outlying issues that maybe cause the machine to quit running, and it takes all that and it puts it into one number and says, how efficiently am I really making this product? Well, one of the biggest things that people don't consider is inconsistent placement, inconsistent errors that are caused by the operator, because an operator cannot be perfectly repetitive. They just can't. So that's one of the calculations into that number. So if you take out some of that inconsistency that an operator potentially causes because they're not as comfortable or they're not as knowledgeable of the inspection, that's going to make your efficiency higher and not add in a bunch of cost. So just some considerations. So then there's kind of the final step of it, which is, how do you develop and how do you discover the right partner? I mentioned some of these things earlier, but it's in the medical device world, and we all know this from living it, nothing's ever frozen until it seems like it's off the production line and into a marketing person's hands that's slapping it out the door to sell. So product is constantly being tweaked. Product is constantly changing. It could be a color. It could be a screen print image on there that's changed. It's all driving to what those production goals are. But that all takes flexibility, because every one of those little changes, whether that's a color, whether it's the type of plastic, whether it's a shape that's molded into the plastic, that all affects automation. Automation can't run in a vacuum without input, is really how it works. So flexibility in a partner. If it all has to be frozen in design and come out with a perfect specification of how to make it, then that's not a value that's being added by the integrator or by the partner. So the other thing is runoff and installation capability. So many times we've got a production line that we've put together, we're working with the customer, and your option is, well, it's not quite all the way finished from the product side. So do I ship it and make it a plant problem? And these are questions that we hear from customers. Or do I finish working on it on our floor or an intermediary pilot line or whichever? So those considerations have a lot of complexity into them, because at that point, we're really the most knowledgeable person on the equipment and on the path to success of the product. So you've got to have that runoff capability on site, and then you've got to have an ability to work with the installation team in the plant to make sure that it runs through all of the customer validations and all of the needs to actually make it a qualified product and really help that validation process. So that's a key part. And the design and development expertise. Like I said, we see 200 to 300 projects a year. All different product types, all different sizes, all different methods, everything in between. And so that gives us a bigger book of experience to base from. And I probably failed to mention, but MEDTECH's been in automation for almost 30 years. Started by two gentlemen that left the mound in the Department of Energy, and how they saw a need in the market and a lack of automation expertise for their own needs, and really helped that form a company. So we're a company of engineers. We're about 100 employees, and about 50% of those are engineers from one fashion or the other. So we come at it from the technical capabilities, engineering perspective. But we have those design and development capabilities and expertise. We have labs. And that's another thing to really look at if you're selecting an automation partner or even an automation journey, is what level of prototyping and development can they help you with? We take products all the time and we put them in our vision lab, our laser lab, work with our partners externally and test out the things that we're trying to do to determine if that is really the right way to do it before we ever start on a machine or a machine design. The parts are too small, the assemblies are too complex to just jump off a literal cliff and say, yep, it works in CAD, it's going to work in production. That's just not reality. So you've got to have that design and that prototyping background and capability to figure out whether it's going to work. And this is almost every project. And then the on-site, labs that I mentioned, the Vision Laser Lab, and you don't have to have those specific ones in a partner that you select with, but that shows that they're invested in the how does it work, as well as here's what it's going to work for you. And then the medical device specialty. Obviously, I'm biased because that's what we do. But, like I mentioned, a medical device line parallel to a water heater line or a chassis line for an automotive car, just two disparate, types of products and production lines. So it's just too much of an extreme to be able to have somebody that's an expert in both. That's a perfect world that everybody would be experts in everything, but it's not reality. So here's some of my contact information. That's the QR code, that if you want to take a shot of it, and that will lead you to our case studies in that within our website, and also some of our background information. Again, I completely want to come at this from a educational perspective. Yes, I'm obviously a sales individual, but if you've got questions about automation, I'd be happy to answer them all. And we don't have the answers to everything. We are not the person that's going to stand up here and I'm going to tell you I'm an expert in everything and everything should come our way. That's not genuine, But what we do have is a lot of background experience, both locally as well as internationally. We've got lines all over the globe, both in China, Europe, some in South America, a lot in Mexico, as you can imagine. And all of those provide experience to help us, help you. And that's really kind of, I guess, the gist out of this. But so if anybody has any questions at any of my slides or information, I think this is probably a key one that a lot of people don't consider is how do you make that line efficient or how do you make that product efficient? And it's just not in only driving down part cost. That's not the only way. If you can eliminate some of the variability, if you can eliminate some of the inconsistencies in gluing or the inconsistencies in inspection, all that's going to do is drive your production to be more efficient. And it's really taking that kind of efficiency perspective is really what will help. So, anybody got any thoughts or questions? I'm happy to answer those. Go for it.
Have you seen the nature of the requests for automation change over the past 18, 24 months? If so, I assume the volume is increasing, but how is the nature of the requests evolving with teams being distributed them?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point in several ways, and I'll try to not meander. So yes, automation increases in just sheer volume, because one of the interesting things for us is we don't work in the PPE space. We don't work with what you would classify as typical COVID-related items. We work in what's normally the elective surgery area, which honestly all got put on hold. So, but what I will say out of that is we did not see a dip in business. So, the other advantage of medical and medical devices is the long-term perspective that it takes. It's not a flash in the pan looking for a hot hit a lot of times. It's what's it fitting within the market and the niche. To your overall question as far as trends within the automation industry, absolutely, because what people have realized is, we've got limited resources right now in the job market. So nobody can hire enough of any skill set, whether that's engineers, operators, inspection, QC, on down the line. So what automation helps you do is at least, at a minimum, in the manual or semi-automated form, have a band-aided solution while you try to solve a little bit of the resourcing. But what it also is, the population's not decreasing. The number of cases of whatever, the need for medical is doing nothing but increasing. And when that happens, everybody's production volumes increase, some at a more staggered rate than others. And there's a realization that I can't just hire more people to fill the function to make more product. You just can't. So we're getting requests from people that have been 100% manual up to this point. You walk into the facility and it's a line of operators standing there under magnifying glasses assembling things. And now they've realized as a whole, this isn't a viable solution for the next 3, 4, 5 years. Honestly, it's not viable for many of them for the next 18 months. And that's something else, I guess, to kind of mention overall for automation is this isn't something that just gets built in 6 months. It's not an overnight, I've got a project, we quote a project, I build it and hand it to you in 4 to 6 months. Many of these projects, obviously depending on scope and size and complexity, are a year and a half. So you gotta be thinking a little bit ahead, looking a little bit, into the future, into the distance, which I know is hard because you're still trying to figure out, do I have a viable product that anybody wants? But there's got to, if nothing else, just to involve somebody that you trust and that, sounds like they know what they're talking about to give you some of that feedback of, well, you're putting these two pieces together with clips. Why is that not a good thing for automation? What complexities does product features cause in adding complexity to automation? And you'll never research and learn enough to learn all of those things on your own. So reach out to somebody that has some expertise in that. I'm never going to be an expert in why you do things in a catheter to make a certain product. That's not me. But what I can tell you is why when you put all of those electronics and features and wires and other things in it, what that causes the automation to have to develop into. And that's really our background or our experiences, how we can add that expertise from years of doing it. And that's kind of the background. So hopefully that kind of answered what you're heading at. So.
How would someone know what type of automation machine size?
Honestly, from the production side, you shouldn't. You never will. And not to be, that we know everything, but we can have a conversation looking at production volumes, what kind of product you're trying to assemble, where you're trying to manufacture at, how many different tier component companies you're working with. It's really, it's taking all of those individual elements to try and give you a specific plan for what you're doing. Because automation's been around for 100 years plus. So to try and learn all of the techniques and types and styles of automation, I don't know them all. So for somebody on the production or the product side to know them, hate to say it this way, but good luck. It just isn't going to happen. So I guess when you're really early on in the startup phase, it's get your product right first, But before you go and decide that you're ready to go to automation and you're ready to go to full production, involve a partner. That's the time. Because I'm not going to help you design your product, to make a special feature or whatever that you're trying to accomplish. But once you figure out, hey, when I put it together like this and this product's like this, it solves a need and it works. And then you've got a partner that comes to you or funding that says, okay, now we need to figure out how to scale. That's when you involve an automation partner. Because I can take each individual component, I can look at your overall assembly, and I can say, this right here, you want to find another way to do this, or here's a couple ideas of other ways to do it, because it's the difference between costing $50,000 for that process and $500,000 for that process. So hopefully that's some level of explanation. So, any other thoughts, concerns? So again, I'll put my thing back up there. Don't hesitate to reach out. Like I mentioned, we do predominantly work with the bigger and the more complex, but I offer free advice. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't have a couch for you to come lay on. But I can definitely give you some opinions and give you some direction and help, even if that's not us. That's fine. Because I'm a firm believer in the world works as a whole round cycle. If we all help each other, at the end of the day, some of it comes back, and some of it you're better off, where it went. So That's just kind of the way it works. So, hopefully. So I was way quicker than intended, but if, yeah, I mean, and like I said, if anybody's got any specific questions or things come in offline, by all means, let me know. And you can feel free to follow up, or I will follow up with you. So hopefully nobody's in a food coma post-lunch.